From the shadowed archives of Miskatonic University, we're opening a truly lamentable case file today, the metaphysical tragedy of one Edward Pickman Derby.
Welcome. What we're diving into here is a profound study in the dissolution of the self. Think of it as a post-mortem on a stolen soul.
So where do we even begin? Well, our investigation doesn't actually start at the beginning of Derby's life, but with the crime that ended it, and that poses our central question right from the get-go. We have to start with the shocking admission from Daniel Upton, the man who knew Derby best. This immediately frames our whole inquiry, forcing us to ask, was this an act of madness, a cold-blooded murder, or was it, as he claims, a necessary purging of something that was no longer his friend? To really understand the crime, you first have to dissect the victim. So let's analyze the unique vulnerabilities that made Edward Derby the perfect target for what can only be described as ontological predation. Derby's profile, when you look at it, reveals this tragic paradox. Here's a man of absolute intellectual genius, but with completely arrested emotional and practical development. His life of overcareful parenting was meant to protect him, but instead it just engineered this profound weakness of will. He was a prodigy in letters, but really a perennial child in life. And this observation right here is absolutely crucial. The moment he meets Asenath Waite, his lifelong coddling made him susceptible to way more than just influence. It led to a complete transference of his core identity. You see, he didn't just fall in love, he found a new, stronger anchor for his dependent nature.
Yeah, witnesses noted that her interest in him wasn't romantic at all. It was acquisitive. She, or let's be more precise, the ancient entity residing within her, saw Derby's fine-wrought brain as the ideal vessel, a brilliant mind just waiting in a will that was tragically easy to bend.
So how did this all happen? We're going to perform something of a clinical breakdown of the process itself, the specific, terrifying mechanics of how Derby's soul was systematically crowded out and, in the end, just stolen. You see, the method described here is a deliberate, multi-stage assault on the self. It starts with hypnotic influence, almost like a trial run, and it culminates in a complete and permanent spiritual displacement. You could say each exchange was just a rehearsal for the final, terrible performance. And this brings us to the observable evidence, because the transformation wasn't just psychological. Witnesses noted these stark physical changes. They described a man who, in these certain moods, looked damnably like his wife and like old Ephraim. The change was something you could actually see with your own eyes. And this really reveals the ultimate goal. This wasn't just about influence or control. No, this was about literal immortality for the predator. The horrifying prospect of moving, as Derby himself came to fear, on and on, body to body, forever. As Derby's own identity started to fracture, he began to talk darkly about saving his identity. You know, his internal struggle, though it's only hinted at in the original text, is now being re-examined. So let's see how this psychological horror is being reinterpreted. Now, what's interesting is that the upcoming 2026 comic adaptation from Image and Top Cow has stated they want to expand on these psychological elements. While the original text portrays Derby as pretty helpless, this adaptation aims to delve deeper into the tension and relationships. It could offer a much more nuanced look at his internal battle. Okay, we now arrive at the final stage of Derby's tragedy. The utter physical horror that ultimately validates Daniel Upton's confession and his violent actions. I mean, this is it. This is the moment of dreadful revelation, when the evidence becomes completely undeniable. A grotesque, foul-smelling messenger arrives at Upton's door, making a sound that just chills him to the bone. Now, critically, the thing on the doorstep wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. It was the last desperate vestige of Edward Derby himself, trapped in a decaying prison of flesh, a body that he had killed months prior in a futile attempt to save himself. And here we really have to consider the contrast in how this horror is presented. Lovecraft's prose is masterful at suggesting horror, using words like fetid and parody to let our own imagination conjure the terror. A modern comic, on the other hand, has to render that putrescence explicitly on the page. It confronts the reader directly with the visceral, visual reality of it. Which brings us right back to this number. An act Upton considered not a murder, but an extermination. A desperate attempt to sever that metaphysical chain of possession before it could claim yet another victim. And that is the final chilling question of this case. It's a reminder that once a passage is broken through by an evil soul, no one who knows of it is ever truly safe. Upton's final fear wasn't of prison. It was of becoming the next link in the chain.